How hard is it to get Minecraft's 3 new rare Halloween jockeys? Hello there, Ray here, and I'm that guy who's been trying to automatically farm every single thing in Minecraft over the last 16 years, even rare mob types. First is the zombie horse jockey. This consists of a normal zombie that is riding on top of a zombie horse. This is the only way you can actually find zombie horses, and its rider will always be holding a iron spear. And the way they come into the game is that the horse will actually spawn, but only in biomes that are types of savannas as well as plains, and it spawns in just like other hostile mobs, meaning a light level of 0. But before we get into different variations that you can find these guys in, they're already pretty darn rare to spawn in these areas. That's because unlike your typical hostile mobs that can spawn in these biomes, the zombie horse spawns are 20 times more rare, being as rare as witches spawning in normally. But when the game tries to spawn these in, because the horses are actually bigger than a witch, if the horse would try to spawn, let's say right here, the game would check to see if the horse would be able to spawn in there without colliding with any nearby blocks, and because it will be touching these blocks, then it will fail and it won't actually spawn in, meaning that their spawn is even rarer than witches. Now, because they only spawn in plains and savannas, we cannot build a farm that is over top of the water, take advantage that no other hostile mobs can actually spawn on the surface here, and rarely would you actually get drowns that would interfere with the hostile mob cap, as only 70 hostile mobs can be in the game at any given time, which is called the mob cap. So if hostile mobs are piling up in other areas in the world, they're not going to spawn inside of our farm, and therefore our farm isn't going to be very efficient. So we'll need a platform here in either the savannas or the plains biomes, but high enough up so that it doesn't allow other hostile mobs to be holding up the mob cap. And since mobs will only spawn 128 blocks away from the player, this means just by going up really high up in the air, we can stop all hostile mobs from spawning altogether. And if we had a little platform below us, they would only spawn on that platform and nowhere else in the world. Now, a general mob farm like this could work well. This has multiple layers that are dark, so mobs can spawn on them. Many layers means that if they don't spawn like in this area, then the game has a chance of finding a different area and spawning them there, as the game will be attempting to reach the mob cap of 70 eventually. We also have an automatic way to actually move all the mobs to a certain area. That's what actually makes it a farm. And this is done by using water, and this is one of the cheapest, easiest ways to move mobs off of the platform, and that way we can have them be killed or maybe sorted and make room for new mobs to spawn on here, as we don't get any new ones until the mob cap is below 70, meaning that we have to eventually remove the previous spawned mobs. So all the mobs are getting pushed off the platform, and in this case we're just having them get pushed to a central killing chamber, and then we're having them drop down and killed for their loot. But when it comes to the zombie horses, we do not want to kill them, but save them as an entity, because yeah, when they die, they just drop some rotten flesh. But luckily, horses take half as much fall damage as most other mobs, and anything that's a passenger of it is supposed to take half as much damage as well, but there's currently a bug where they take the full damage and will actually die. This is actually a problem because the horse will survive the fall, but the rider will not. But if we move up the killing platform to save the zombie on top of the zombie horse, we end up saving all the other hostile mobs, which will then just hold up the mob cap. What we really want is just these two guys without all the other guys that come from the farm. But these mobs are not actually all the same size. If we pull up the hitboxes again, we can see that the skeleton is taller, and then we got the creepers, and then slightly shorter than the creepers is the zombie horse. And because when the game spawns in these mobs, even if it's a jockey, the bottom entity is the one that actually gets checked to see if it will fit. As I said earlier, a horse won't fit in an area like this. That's because this is the box that's being checked to see if it can spawn in, and it doesn't actually check to see if it will collide if there is a zombie on top. So the game will actually spawn in mobs like this because it's only checking the bottom guy and isn't actually checking to see if it's okay for this guy to spawn in, which could cause them to die. So because it's checking each mob when it's spawning it in, that means if we would place down blocks on our little platform here, no mobs could spawn unless they could fit underneath of this, meaning that we would only get spiders. But if we swap these blocks out for instead having some top trapdoors, now all of a sudden skeletons will collide with the block, meaning that they will fail, as well as zombies, as they are just too tall. But a creeper, which is slightly shorter, will actually be able to spawn in because it will fit in without hitting any of the colliding blocks. And it just happens to be that the zombie horse is even smaller than the creeper, meaning that it can also spawn in this area. So if the whole ceiling was made out of these trapdoors, then we would automatically get rid of all zombies and skeletons, and we just end up with the zombie horse, the creeper, as well as the spider. But is there a block that will be even lower yet that will get rid of creepers but still let us spawn in horses? Well, in this world where I have every single mob sorted by their size, I also have every single block sorted by their size. And in this area here, I have all the upside down blocks, meaning that things can fit underneath at different sizes. So here's our top trapdoor, and you can see a creeper will fit underneath of it. But if we don't want the creeper to fit underneath, we can use the row right beside it, which is slightly thicker, and that is this amethyst here. So if we go ahead and put a creeper in, we can see that a creeper will still fit underneath without colliding with it. So if we go to the next row that's even thicker yet, if we put a creeper here, we can see the creeper is actually going to collide with it. If you look really close between the hitbox of the creeper and the collision of the actual amethyst. But a horse in this exact same area doesn't actually collide, as there is room between the amethyst and the top of the horse. But there's a problem with amethyst, and that is it actually will put off some light. Even though it's a really small amount of light, zombie horses have to have a light level of 0, meaning they can't have any light nearby. And because of this, it means that we cannot actually use this to stop creepers from spawning in, but still allowing the zombie horse to. But luckily there is another block in the game that is the same width as this amethyst here, and that is the drip leaf. This bottom piece here doesn't have any collision, so you can walk right through it. It means that mobs could also spawn directly inside of it. But this top piece here does have a collision. Notice that I can't walk through it because my head hits on it, and if you're on top of it, you can actually stand on it because it has collision as well. And it's the perfect height, so if a creeper would try to spawn in here, it would actually collide with the block. But if a horse spawns in here, it's too short and doesn't collide, meaning that it will succeed where creepers will fail. So instead of our trapdoors, we just need to replace them with the big drip leaf. Well, the problem is you can't just place this anywhere. It needs to actually be placed on a type of dirt, which is problematic because when the jockeys come through, if it's solid dirt, they're going to just keep suffocating it until they die. Now we can fix this pretty easily just by putting another gap of air between the layers so that they're not so close together. But we run into another problem when we have these little drip leaves in here. We can't really easily wash the mobs off the platform, because if the entire platform is made out of these, when we try to wash the mobs off so that we can get new mobs, they actually will not allow the water to go through, meaning that the mobs will just sit here, which will hold up our mob cap and we won't end up getting any new mobs, including the new chance of getting a rare jockey. But luckily the only things that can spawn underneath of the big drip leaf is our zombie horse, as well as the spiders. Both of them are bigger than one block, meaning that when the game spawns them in, they'll spawn them directly into the center of the block, so that part of them will be hanging off of both of the sides. We can use this to our advantage, so if they would spawn like on this block here, they're going to be touching a little bit of the water that is in this row here. So if we alternate some big drip leaf and some trapdoors, then we can have these guys get moved out of these dry areas with no water, while still restricting most of the creepers to only being able to spawn in the area where we have the trapdoors. So this is how it would look. So in this row as well as this row, the game will only be able to spawn in our spiders as well as zombie horses. But in this row here, where we need to let the water go through, we can get these spiders as well as the zombie horses, but also we can get the creepers. So we were able to remove a lot of the creepers from our spawning platform, as well as all the other hostile mobs, except for the spiders. This will just give it so that when the game tries to spawn in a mob, it'll be much more likely to actually be a zombie horse, overall making our farm more efficient. I also went ahead and put that little air gap in between so that when they spawn in, they won't put their heads into the solid blocks and they won't end up dying from suffocation. It also turns out that the game kind of uses some of the horse code when it spawns in the zombie horses, despite them spawning in using the hostile mob cap. And because of this reason, they actually will only spawn on grass blocks. So I had to come in and switch out the dirt for grass blocks. Otherwise, they just wouldn't spawn in. This might be a bug, or it might be intentional so that they only spawn here on the surface and unlikely to spawn inside of caves. Now when it comes to the washing of the mobs, I went ahead and also moved up the killing platform so that when the jockeys fall down on top of it, it will not kill the zombie. But the spiders that spawn in, they will actually die from it, because they have less health than the zombies. The creepers have the same health as the zombies, but when they hit the platform, they'll get low health and then they will die from the magma. Now, because the zombie horse will take less damage when it falls than the other mobs, it will have more health that it can spare by standing on top of the magma before it will eventually die. And because of this reason, the zombie on top doesn't actually take much more damage because it's on top of the horse rather than actually touching the magma. So even though the zombie has very low health and could almost die, it will not because it's on top of the horse. Now, to stop the zombie horse just from dying, I put in a portal that the mob is supposed to go through, but it's often so busy taking damage, it doesn't really think about going into the portal. So I put a little incentive on the opposite side. I put an iron golem here, and that's because hostile mobs will actually see the iron golem as an enemy they should attack, and they will walk towards it in hopes to try to kill it. And since the zombie horse jockey actually has a zombie on top of it, whatever's the rider, it will actually control the thing that's riding. So the zombie is actually the one who's making the horse pathfind over here to try to attack the iron golem. And it thinks it can walk across these open trapdoors, and then it will actually move across without falling through the hole. And then as soon as it touches a portal, it'll get teleported, or any other mob would happen to walk across and then fall through this hole here. And all the mobs that die on top of the platform and drop their items, I'm having them get picked up by a hopper minecart and stored in the chest over here. But in order for it to actually count as a farm, we need to actually store the thing that we're trying to farm. So just like farming items gets you items that you can actually store away in a chest, farming zombie horses or zombie horse jockeys means that you need to actually collect the entity and store it so that you can actually use it if you want it. But we cannot store these guys in the overworld because them just being here is going to hold up the hostile mob cap so that no more of them will spawn in. But by putting them through to a different dimension like the nether dimension, it's considered a different dimension with another whole 70 mob cap to fill up. So while they're just sitting here in these piles, they're stopping other hostile mobs from spawning here in the nether dimension, but they're not stopping us from using the farm here to get even more of these guys over in the overworld. Now the storage isn't anything too complicated, they just walk out the portal, fall into these little pits here, and then they get stored until you want to move them. They're a little bit hard to move because you cannot actually push them, which is a property of all types of jockeys, but they definitely want to attack you, so you can use that to make them walk towards you. And you can use things like fishing rods as well as minecarts in order to move them around. But you'll want to get a lot of these guys because the majority of the time you're just going to get these normal guys, which is a zombie that's not wearing any armor. It doesn't have a jack-o'-lantern or pumpkin on its head. It's also right-handed, and it most likely will be missing a bunch of other hidden properties that you normally can't see. And when they do spawn in, they're only going to spawn in with a group of 1, where most mobs will spawn in groups as high as 4. So just the plain guy is only a 1% chance of spawning in, and then if it just happens to be the one day out of the year, which is Halloween, during those 24 hours, there's a 22% chance that it will have a carved pumpkin on its head, or a only 2% chance of it having a jack-o'-lantern on its head. There's also an additional 5% chance that it will actually be left-handed instead of the 95% chance of it being right-handed, with an additional 25% chance that the weapon it's holding will actually be enchanted. And if you even get luckier, there's a 15% chance on top of that it'll actually spawn in with some armor, with the majority of the time being either leather, copper, or gold, with only 4/100th of a percentage it having the chance of being diamond, with even a slimmer chance of spawning in with 2 armor pieces, where it has to go through the same extreme low percentage of it also being diamond, where getting a fully armored guy is extremely rare. But each piece of the armor also has an additionally slim chance of being enchanted, and if you combine this with these mostly hidden attributes that the zombies can have, the chance of finding one of these is almost 0. But getting the next rare jockey is so much harder, which is this crazy thing. Consists of a camel, but not a normal camel, a new camel husk. This is an undead mob. It also consists of 2 undead mobs on top of it, the husk mob as well as the new parched mob, which is like a mummified skeleton. But unlike the zombie horse, the way that the camel husk comes into the game is that it will actually try to spawn a husk here in the desert biome, which means that it has to be dark so that a hostile mob like a husk can try to even spawn. Plus it needs to have sky access because husk will only spawn if the block that they're standing on is exposed to the sky, so they will not spawn like inside of any caves. But then the husk mob has a 10% chance to, instead just spawning the husk, it'll actually spawn the camel with the husk on top of it, and then it will also spawn in the parched mob also riding the camel. This means that the camel will use the same hostile spawns similar to the zombie horrors, where it can't spawn like normal camels, but instead we'll have to free up the mob cap for hostile mobs, being the cap of 70 mobs, in order for it to actually spawn in. Which also means it's unable to breed similar to the zombie horse, but unlike the zombie horse, which sits down relatively low, compared to the camel, which sits up really tall, which means we cannot use our previous zombie horse farm in order to just isolate these new type of jockeys. And looking at our lineup of all the mobs by their different heights, on the high side over here, we actually have the camel, meaning that every other type of hostile mob that could also spawn inside of the farm is technically shorter than the camel, meaning that we cannot restrict the height within the farm in order to just get camels. Although there's technically one mob that could spawn in the farm that is actually taller than the camel, it's not really worth trying to stop Endermen from spawning in the farm, because the chance of them spawning is really small, though it wouldn't really affect the farm, plus we would have to have a block over top of the camel that also allows sky access. Which is another reason why this farm will not work, because this big solid platform above will prevent the sky from shining rays down onto the floor, meaning that we would never get camels. So what we'll need to do is remove the roof of this so we get some skylight. We'll also have to remove all these height restricting blocks. So I went ahead and did this. Notice that we just got these empty platforms and we have access to the sky so that camels will spawn. But remember, they only spawn when it's dark, meaning the farm will only work half the time because it will only work during nighttime. But unlike nighttime, which you can skip to get more daytime, you cannot get more nighttime. There's no like opposite of a bed where you can just constantly get nighttime in order to get these hostile mobs. So that will also make these mobs much harder to get than the zombie horses, which we can get during the daytime and the nighttime. This also meant that I have to put some sky access allowing blocks like glass here to get sky access onto the platform down below. Now since the camel cannot spawn over here anyways, because it's going to hit up against the block here, then you can put in blocks that don't allow sky access. We just need them where the mobs can actually spawn, which further restricts how many platforms we can actually put in, because we can only have one that's exposed to the sky. So every platform below would never spawn anything, so we can only have a single layer across the entire world. So unlike the previous farm, which we could tile up and down, we can only tile this one horizontally. We do not need grass, so they will actually just spawn on any full topped block, such as stone here, and then they'll get washed down just like the previous farm. Down here we also have some magma, because we are dealing with the parched mob. I did have to raise that platform down below up a little bit, because these guys only have 16 health instead of 20 like most hostile mobs, including the husk. But other mobs could also spawn on these platforms since we have no restrictions, and when these get sent down here, spiders have low health, so they'll die pretty quickly, but the other mobs will kind of stand here, or they'll try to pathfind towards the iron golem and fall off the edge. And once again, we're collecting all the items with a hopper minecart. Now because the camel is being ridden by a hostile mob, once again it will target the iron golem that we have standing over here. And the mob that's in front actually is the one in charge, meaning that the husk there is the one trying to attack the iron golem. So to accommodate these taller mobs, I did raise the walls because camels can hop over 1.5 blocks. And also raise the portal so they don't suffocate, as the top of their heads is quite tall. Then once they go through into another dimension, I have a similar collection area over here where they're just being stored up. With the main thing to keep in mind is that since we got two guys on this camel, when they rotate, the guy on the end, which is the parch, will hang over a little bit, meaning that his suffocation point, which is this red line here, could also potentially go inside of a nearby solid block and he could suffocate and die. This goes back to anything that's riding another entity, it ignores your collision, meaning that the bottom entity could send you underneath of a solid block, which would cause you to suffocate. So to try to avoid that, just come in with some non-solid blocks at the same height as this little red line here. That way you're unlikely to actually lose this guy. Although they are low health, so make sure to heal them up by using harming potions on them. And use name tags on the mounts like the camel in order to stop them all from despawning. Now at the moment there is a bug that if this husk here has the ability to pick up loot, it will get rid of its spear in order to pick up any item in the game rather than only picking up an item if it's better than the weapon it has. Which in itself will be a rare once they fix this bug. which is why it's beyond rare to get some guys like this in survival, as both of them have jack-o'-lantern helmets, which is only possible during the 24 hours of Halloween, plus all the other crazy things that they can have on top of them, but it's not just done on one mob, but rather two, which makes the third rare Halloween jockey much easier to get. This is the new zombie Nautilus, which is being ridden by a drowned, but not any type of drown. It has to be a drown with a trident. The way they come into the game is that the game will try to spawn in a drown in a ocean biome, which is 16 times more rare than drown spawning inside of river biomes or dripstone biomes. But out of the ones that do happen to spawn in, there's only a 6% chance that one of these guys will actually spawn in holding a trident in their hand. And then out of those guys, half the time they'll actually spawn on top of a zombie Nautilus, which makes them already quite rare in order to find these guys. But luckily I've made quite a few different types of drown farms, and we're going to use that to actually get these guys more easily. Now, a lot of other different types of water mobs can spawn inside the ocean, so we don't really want those to spawn in, but luckily most of them will not spawn inside of bubble columns, which also helps us out because when the drowns do spawn in here, the bubble columns will push them upwards. This makes them easier to collect because it turns mobs that spawn across a big cube area and makes them end up on a single plane. And then once up the top here, I have some flowing water, which will push them all towards the center where we have some nether portals. I also got some turtle eggs here in the center to kind of help them try to pathfind into the portals. And then once they get teleported by the portals, we just have some holding bays here where you can store up a whole bunch of them before you have to come in and sort out the ones that are actually on top of Nautiluses. Or you can sort them further by using the smaller hitbox of the Nautilus to separate them from the larger drowns. Now see how to get the rarest mobs in Minecraft with this playlist here, or YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this video over here. And because of all these people, you guys are able to watch the videos for free. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!